Good evening again. Tonight's talk is The Nature of Inequality. It's part of the ongoing Project 6050 here at Michigan State University and part of the Honors College Sharper Focus Wider Lens Forum. I'm Cynthia Jackson-Elmore, the Dean of the Honors College, and I'd like to welcome all of you here with us in the room, as well as those joining us through live stream with the MSU Alumni Association. To my immediate right is NiCole T. Buchanan. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology, also in the College of Social Science. NiCole is a licensed clinical psychologist who teaches social justice and multicultural psychology. Her research focuses on the intersections of gender and race ethnicity with an emphasis on the harassment targeting African Americans and Latina women. Her research publications examine racialized sexual harassment, race and gender-based harassment among college students and working adults, race and gender role ideology as moderators of harassment and outcomes among white and Black women, contra-power harassment in academia, gendered bullying, and therapeutic concerns of racially ambiguous and non-visible minority women. NiCole is part of the Research Consortium on Gender-Based Violence here at MSU, which provides a collaborative, multidisciplinary vehicle for faculty and students to engage in social action research that influences significant local, state, national, and international practice and policy related to gender-based violence. She earned her doctorate from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
I realize that many of you are probably already aware of explicit bias, that kind of old-fashioned bigotry like racism and sexism, where people will consciously hold opinions, make comments, and engage in behaviors that convey their attitudes and their beliefs about various social hierarchies. The good news: this kind of bias has been steadily decreasing over the last 50 years. But if explicit bias and overt prejudice really are decreasing, why is it we see these widening gaps or continued gaps in social inequalities among groups like the ones that we'll be talking about today? The reason, I believe, is because there's a second kind of bias at play here, and this type of bias is far more insidious. What I'm referring to is called implicit bias. This is a type of bias that impacts who we are and who we will develop to become before we even have conscious awareness that it exists. In fact, preschoolers are already able to articulate and act on social hierarchies related to gender and race, despite the fact that most of us adults think that we're hiding them from this information. Implicit bias reflects our unconscious associations, those associations that lead us to believe that certain kinds of people are more moral, good, kind, while other kinds of people are perhaps less so. But developing implicit bias is not pathological. It's not even malicious. It's actually a very normal brain function. Our brains simplify the over 11 million pieces of data that we have to process every single second by categorizing it, simplifying it, organizing it, and then automating it. When pieces of information are consistently paired together over time, things like dark skin equals bad or dangerous, our brains simply make those associations automatically. And they do it without our conscious awareness that they're doing so. And this is why we can develop implicit bias without actually having awareness of doing so, and we can have bias in ways that contradict what we actually believe, we think, and feel about others. And we can do this even if we're members of those very same marginalized groups. So we all develop implicit bias, and this is because every single day we're inundated with dozens, if not hundreds, of messages that pair groups of people with a variety of messages and images about things like intelligence, safety, work ethic, morality. So we can no more hope to emerge from this deluge without bias than we can hope to walk through the center of a thunderstorm without getting wet. But perhaps the most important problem is that unconscious associations influence our behaviors. And because implicit bias is unconscious, we have little control over it. We often have no idea that it's influenced our beliefs, and certainly very little awareness that it's influenced the way we treat other people. For these reasons, we all need a renewed commitment to addressing implicit bias. And it's not because it's the right thing to do or the charitable thing to do to help those poor marginalized people over there, but because implicit bias is inherently harmful to all parties, whether you're a member of a marginalized group or a member of a privileged group. We all pay the price for holding these kinds of biases. And we pay the price with our basic humanity, our ability to feel empathy for others, our ability to find connection in other human beings and with one another. And this is because we are all harmed. So we all have to have a stake in making this better. I'll give you a quick example related to college. We have evidence that increased diversity in educational settings, teaching students how to understand difference and be competent in talking and dealing with difference across people, that this breeds academic excellence for all students. Students that are reared in classrooms that have diversity have a variety of beneficial effects. They show increased cognitive flexibility, better problem solving, improved creativity, improved communication skills, and we send them into the world as more effective leaders. Yet, implicit bias and the daily experiences of diverse faculty and students diminish their full participation in these very settings. This is a Facebook post from an MSU student, if you can read it. As an example, students of color report feeling unwelcome in college classrooms. They're assumed to be intellectually inferior, they're passed over for group projects, they're subjected to negative comments about their groups and their communities. And diverse faculty, particularly female faculty of color, report feeling marginalized, having their knowledge and their credentials continuously questioned by students and their colleagues, and feeling as if they're not valued within the institution or by their fellow faculty members. When this happens, marginalized students and faculty will often disengage. Many even consider, and often do, leave their current institutions, perhaps even their field of study, perhaps their career path. And because they do this because they can no longer tolerate the constant deluge of negative experiences related to implicit bias. And this is important to all of us because this costs all of our students, the marginalized and the privileged. It costs them the benefits that I've already named related to diversity in education. But more good news. We can change our implicit biases. We can change our likelihood of acting on those implicit biases. First of all, we have to be accountable and take responsibility on learning our own bias. We have to challenge it. We have to bring it to conscious awareness. And we have to do this by asking ourselves certain questions, like, what evidence do I have that this bias I've developed is actually true? Perhaps more importantly, what evidence do I have that can disconfirm this paired association I've learned over time? And here at an institution of higher learning, I believe we have a special obligation to address bias because we are shaping the world's future leaders. This makes it incumbent upon us to address our own bias and to become skilled in how to talk about these issues in our classes, whether we're teaching an engineering class, an economics class, or a class in social science. It's in our classes that students become marginalized and turn away from key professions. It's in our classes where students feel they're not welcome in our ivory tower. And it's in our classes where students decide that colleges do not welcome their perspectives nor their presence. Conversely, we also have power. We have power to reverse this trend. We have the power to decide that we will educate to minimize implicit bias. We have the power to educate ourselves on how to facilitate these conversations within our classrooms, our faculty meetings, and our staff meetings. And we have the power to decide that we're not going to passively wait for the opportunity to come, that instead we're going to seek out opportunities to dismantle implicit bias. We can take responsibility for transforming our futures. And we can do so by sending students into the world that are ready for the rapidly changing and increasingly diverse workplaces in the US and abroad, students that are culturally competent, and students that can interact in a truly inclusive manner, which is going to be necessary for the future world we're all facing. These are the kinds of leaders that we want to emerge from our classrooms here at MSU and across the nation. But they won't be able to do so if we don't teach them how to challenge their own implicit bias. And we do this by first challenging our implicit bias as instructors, as an institution, as leaders for the next generation.
Thank you, NiCole.